we have a great event this morning. It's all wrapped around the theme of making Barack Obama a lame duck president. We know how, yes, thank you. That is, when others at this convention are thinking mostly about some personal or private agenda, we are taking our country's greatest needs to heart, and we have got to force this man to be a lame duck president. And the three panelists today are going to talk about that. Most of their comments will probably talk about how damaging Barack Obama has been to the state of California and how we can begin to make those changes at home as well as nationally. So we've given them freedom to talk about these damages in our state specifically and then nationally as well. Each one of them is going to be given 10 minutes in their opening remarks. And we really need you to grab hold and think of some good questions to stump them later. And then once we turn it over to questions, we can ask specific questions, or there could be a general question that all three of them could answer. And we'll be moderating the time. We're going to stay on top of it. My good friend Donna Woodrum is down here with cards, and she's going to call me to task if I get too far astray. Let's see. I think I've made all of my announcements. I'm going to introduce our very first speaker of our panel, and that is a good friend of the Tea Party California Caucus. He's on our steering committee. We get to hear from him every week as we plan these wonderful events, and that is Steve Frank. Can I have a hand for Steve Frank? Because Steve Frank has shown so much courage in the California Republican Party. It's amazing. He is a political consultant. He is the author of Political News and Views, and if you don't get that newsletter emailed to you, what time in the morning, Steve, do you?
3 a.m.
3 a.m. If you're up at 3 a.m., you could be the first reader. And then also, he has been named one of the 25 most conservative voices in the state of California. Let's welcome again Steve Frank to our panel.
What a great day in America. Only 697 days left of Barack the First. I go on the Brian Sussman show at 6:45 on Wednesday mornings for the last 4.5, close to 5 years. And that, I should note, is thanks to my good friend Tom Del Beccaro, who introduced me to Brian. And it's always amazing in San Francisco that they have people there that are Americans. I am shocked. They have people who believe the Constitution means what it says. Worst of all, they have listeners to the Sussman show that believe that government should be honest. I know that's a concept that's foreign to us. When I look at the president, not Barack Obama in particular, but a president of the United States, what I see is a role model for the young people of our nation, for the people of our nation to do well, and to go by the book. And that if the President of the United States is corrupt, if the President of the United States says the U.S. Constitution is but a guideline, and Congress is just an overpaid bunch of retirees that don't have to be listened to, if you have a president that tells the courts, I'll do what I please, what are you going to do about it? Then we have young people saying, why do I have to follow the law? The greatest example occurred this past week. We now know that if you lied about your subsidy and your health care program and your earnings, and you have to by law pay back that overpayment of subsidies. There's been several stories this week about taxpayers saying, why should I? And there are tens of thousands that are refusing to even note it on their IRS forms for April 15th. And why should they? If you have a president of the United States that uses the IRS as a department of the DNC, if you have a president of the United States You know, we had Richard Nixon that had an enemies list. Yeah, and he was wrong. We have a president that uses the IRS to punish his political enemies. I come from Simi Valley, down in Ventura County, and our Tea Party, Simi Valley Moore Park Tea Party, one of those that's suing because we could not get our tax-exempt status that we filed for. And the head of the Tea Party at the time, Doug Cross, was asked, they wanted to know what we talked about at our meetings, who said it. They wanted our agendas and our minutes. We don't keep minutes. They wanted our bylaws, barely. But this is the IRS under Barack Obama. And the good news is, if you're looking for drug dealers, if you're looking for criminals that are planning a bank robbery, if you're looking for somebody that's planning an assassination, you do not need cops anymore. We have the NSA listening in on all of our conversations. And maybe the NSA should be turned around to look for criminals instead of spying on Angela Merkel in Germany, spying on Randall Jordan in San Luis Obispo, spying on every American and every person on this earth. So as a role model, what Barack Obama is saying is like Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Somebody is watching you. Somebody's reporting on you. Somebody is telling on you, squealing on you. And, you know, I have some people I really don't like. I really don't. I don't have any prejudices, color, nationality. I do have two prejudices in life. One, I hate snow, which is why I live in California. The other thing is, I hate bow ties. And so, I don't know what you know, I just hate bow ties. And so, what we have is a president of the United States who knows everything about you because he can get into those NSA files. And if you think you're going to be running for office, if you think you're going to be a political leader, there's a hammer ready for you. But the worst part, we need to be a nation where color doesn't matter. We need to be a nation where the laws that govern us are used for everybody equally. Equally. In 2004, in Philadelphia, a group of Black Panthers went to white polling places with baseball bats. And we know this not because there were witnesses only, but there was video of it. That if you were a white person trying to vote, they would swing the bats and say, "This isn't your day to be here." And people walked away for fear. One of the last things the Bush administration did was start a trial. They were about to go to trial when Bush left office of these Black Panthers who had suppressed the vote. The first order of business of the bigoted Eric Holder was to stop the prosecution and say, no harm, no foul, vote suppression is okay. He stopped the prosecution. As we know, the president has no problem denouncing white police officers in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who are actually members of the NAACP and honored by them because the police officer had the temerity of arresting a out-of-control, out-of-order Harvard professor who happened to be Black. Arresting somebody that was disturbing the peace, and the officer got into trouble. Yet we see around the country the president acting as a role model. He's made sure to apologize for the terrorists. He has made sure to hate Israel. Next week, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be speaking And 2 days ago, the White House put out a press release that this is going to stop the tentative and tenuous negotiations with Iran. And of course, now we find out yesterday that Iran is actually Al-Qaeda. Let's get real here. This is the role model that we are facing. What can we do about this? The Republican Party, conservatives, constitutionalists have to stand for something more than election. We have to stand for principle, values, and the Constitution. I've been doing this since 1960, and I love winning elections. More important than that, I love to fight a battle based on principle and values. And if I'm only running a candidate because I want to see them elected, and I don't care what type of candidate they are, we get what we deserve. So what I urge all of us to do is, whenever appropriate, and I'm proud to say I'm the only non-attorney on this panel, but I want to give them business. I want to give them business. I want to see lots of lawsuits against the bigotry, the corruption. We need whistleblowers. We need people going on talk radio, letters to the editor, telling the story. We need to stand up before we're pushed down. And that's what it's going to take. People with courage, people with values, people willing to stand up for America. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Frank. I couldn't agree more. It is terrible when I think about President Barack Obama being a role model. That's one of the worst things. That's, in its own way, really worse than a lot of the terrible policies that he's brought forth. Our next panelist is Tim Sandifer. Tim Sandifer is the principal attorney at the Pacific Legal Foundation. He's an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and he's appeared many times on shows like John Stossel, the Armstrong and Getty program, and John Lehrer. Please help me welcome Tim Sandifer.
Thank you very much. I'm honored and touched to have been invited because, among other things, I'm not a Republican. And so I'm pleased that, to see that you are interested enough in advancing your principles to look beyond party boundaries to those allies out there who, like you, are concerned about the fate of the Constitution in our country at the present time. I was asked to talk about some of the things that we might do together to try and rein in the danger that is presented by a lame duck president. We've been saying, make sure he's a lame duck president. Remember that a lame duck president is actually extraordinarily dangerous because he has no concern about being reelected and is therefore free to do as he pleases. And one shudders to think what the pardon list is going to look like, for those of us who remember the Clinton years. One of the big concerns at present that we're watching this litigation go forward is the administration's exemptions and waivers from federal law under Obamacare, under the immigration statutes that we've seen in the recent months. These waivers are being issued unilaterally by the president without any congressional oversight, and they're basically writing new law. But it's a little bit worse than that, because, for example, with Obamacare, what the president is doing is often being referred to in the media as changing the law, and he's not actually changing the law. What the president is doing is declaring that he's not going to enforce the law for a certain amount of time. He's going to look the other way and allow the law to be violated, the law that he's so proud of that he himself refers to it as Obamacare, right? And so as a result, something like this happens. It's now illegal for me to buy certain kinds of health insurance plans. For example, it's illegal for me to buy a health insurance plan that doesn't cover me in case I get pregnant, right? And it's true. So now I lose my health insurance, and I don't buy a plan I buy a plan rather that from my previous plan that didn't cover me for in case I get pregnant, and that's illegal. The president has said that it's okay for me to continue under that plan. Well, now suppose that something happens to me. I'm driving home this morning. I get hit by a car. I get rushed to the hospital. Do you have any insurance? Yeah, whip out my insurance card. Well, my insurance card has been issued under a contract that's illegal. So now suppose a dispute arises between me and my hospital over that insurance policy, and we go to court. Now the judge has to decide whether to enforce that policy. He's not bound by the fact that the president failed to enforce the law. That just means that he failed to enforce the law. The law is still the law. The policy is still illegal. What the president is doing by failing to enforce it is setting the groundwork for legal disputes that we will see for years to come under these illegal insurance policies that the president is allowing to still be sold. They ought to still be sold. It ought to be illegal for me to buy an insurance plan that doesn't cover me in case I get pregnant. But that is the law now, and he is simply refusing to enforce that law. That's a serious concern. Obviously, the illegal immigration issue is a huge matter, right? The president has written a policy that is basically like a police officer saying, you know, I'm just not going to enforce the parking laws on the right side of the street because I don't like that. I think people should be allowed to park there. It's illegal to park anywhere on the street, but I think you should be allowed to park there. So I'll only enforce the parking laws on the left side of the street and not on the right side of the street. What is that if not writing a new law? What is that if not creating law? The president has a constitutional obligation. I'm sure you all have your constitutions with you. You can look it all up. The Constitution says that the president, quote, shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, end quote. Now, think about that wording for a second. This is about the most mandatory language in the entire Constitution. Most of the other stuff says things like the president may do such and such, or the president shall have the power to do such and such. Here is a provision that says that the Constitution, it says that the president shall, not may, take care. He shall, it's not just that he does something, he must take care. And he shall not just take care, he has to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Not just executed, but faithfully executed. That's the most mandatory language in the entire Constitution. In fact, the phrase faithfully execute appears elsewhere in the Constitution, right? That's the presidential oath. The president is required to take an oath that he will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. So the obligation that the president take care that the laws be faithfully executed is pitched at the very highest range of constitutional obligation. If you were to write a constitution to forbid the president from picking and choosing what laws to enforce, these are exactly the words that you would use, right? And we know from the history of the founding era, we know from the English Civil Wars that led up to the American Revolution, that one of the primary concerns of the founding fathers was the king's tendency to pick and choose what laws to enforce in order to favor those he liked or punish those he disliked. Remember, if the president can, if anybody in authority can grant exceptions to the law, it's very dangerous for a number of reasons. One is, powerful political interests gain control of that power and use it for their own benefit. You and I don't have that kind of political access, so we're not going to get a waiver, right? Another one is if the person in power can pick and choose what laws to enforce, he can demand a little backsheesh in exchange for that, right? We all remember how the president granted various waivers under No Child Left Behind on the condition that you basically comply with what he wanted you to do anyway, right? So this is a very serious concern. As you know, the Texas Federal District Court last week or the week before issued a preliminary injunction barring the enforcement of the president's immigration policy. Didn't reach the constitutional question. That's still to come. This is just sort of a preliminary step on a technical ground. But nevertheless, it was a big slap at the administration. The administration immediately asked the judge to withhold his order, and the state, within a few hours, responded to that, because Texas is really pissed. Not surprising. So that case is headed up to the courts of appeal, no doubt, and it will be real fireworks when that gets decided. Another concern is the reach of federal administrative agencies. A lot of you know that we talk about law in that sort of schoolhouse rock notion that our elected officials are responsible for the laws that get passed, and that's just fiction. The vast majority of the laws under which you live your life are not passed by elected officials at all. They're passed by hired bureaucrats and administrative agencies who can't even be fired because they're members of government unions, right? We look at Obamacare is basically an empty piece of paper that hands to the, 2,300 empty pieces of paper that goes to the Department of Health and Human Services for them to write regulations about what sort of health insurance plans you can have and so forth. And the reach of this power is extremely broad. Right now at the Foundation, Pacific Legal Foundation, we're really concerned about something that the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps of Engineers are proposing. They've proposed a regulation to expand authority under the Clean Water Act so that the federal government can regulate basically any wet spot on Earth. This is, as you know, the Clean Water Act is very simple. It says you can't discharge a pollutant from a point source into a water of the United States. What's a pollutant? Whatever the government says it. Right? What's a water of the United States? It's whatever the government says it is, right? So that water, if a molecule of water can travel from this bottle eventually over any period of time into the Mississippi River, it becomes a water of the United States. That's what the federal government has argued. The Supreme Court said, no, that's not okay, in a case that we won about 10 years ago. But we don't know what it does allow. So we'll be in business for plenty of time, as long as we're supported from people like you who believe in the things that we do. And finally, another major concern as far as I'm speaking about administrative agencies is the Independent Payment Advisory Board, or IPAB, provision of Obamacare. This is the provision that creates an unelected agency that writes policy on Medicare reimbursement rates. Those policies are called recommendations in the law, and yet the law holds that they go into effect as law without any action by the President, the Congress, or the courts. In fact, the President, the Congress, and the courts are prohibited from interfering with what they do. If Congress wants to stop IPAB from going forward, it has to repeal IPAB by a joint resolution that must pass with a two-thirds vote of all elected members of Congress within a 1-month window in 2017. And if that doesn't occur, IPAB is a permanent feature of the legal landscape. Unsurprisingly, even Obamacare's supporters have referred to IPAB as a group of platonic guardians of the law. In the brief that I filed in the lawsuit challenging Obamacare, I couldn't help but point out that Jefferson and Adams despised Plato. In fact, they referred to the dark emanations of his foggy mind. And the reason that they wrote the Constitution was to prohibit anything like platonic guardians from running our lives. This legal challenge is sitting on the front doorstep of the U.S. Supreme Court, and they're expected to decide soon whether to take that case. What Congress can do right now is to put a stop to this administrative expansion under the Clean Water Act, under Obamacare, and to the President's own unilateral decision not to enforce his laws. That requires guts, and it requires leaders with principle. And that's your challenge. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, Tim, you led me to, I'm not going to announce my question now, but he gave me a great question, so I think we'll start off with a good question here in a minute. So we all know that California is our very favorite state, but how many people's second favorite state is Texas? All right, all right. We appreciate their challenge to the president, and that's the types of things we need to see going forward. Our third speaker today is my friend Tom Del Beccaro. And Tom Del Beccaro is a past CRP chairman. He's also the publisher of the Political Vanguard. He's a contributor oftentimes on Fox, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And he is the author of the book, The Divided Era. Tom, would you come up and talk to us about your disdain with our president?
Thank you much. It's great to be here. I do want to make a couple of comments, especially to Steve Frank, or to you. I want to assure you that 99% of lawyers ruin it for the rest of us. And the other comment being, I don't even know how to tie a bow tie. So, wasn't that inspiring for both of them? Let's see. I wanted to talk to you a bit about what I think we should be doing, and of course we as Americans or in general, but also conservatives and people who care about limited government, what we need to do going forward. And a little bit of history involved with this. We're certainly in this state the minority party, but at other times, you know, we're not in charge of the White House now. We've been the minority party. Let me tell you, throughout political history, American history, if the minority party wants to become the majority party, they have to have a vision. They have to give voters a choice, something to aspire to as to why they're in this game that we call politics. And the great realignments in American political history occurred when a particular party adopted an agenda and then moved to see it in action. Our own party, the Republican Party, of course, used to be a third party. And what did it do? In 1960, it started to adopt an agenda and stand by it. And the reason why the Republican Party became ascendant for the rest of that half century and a bit beyond that, and the reason why there was an alignment is because they were the successful party not only with ending slavery, but making sure that throughout the country, through things like the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, to guarantee certain voting rights. We adopted an agenda, people eventually responded to it, and they became the dominant party. The Democrats for themselves were in and out of politics for a while. Of course, the Democrats of the late 1800s were more conservative than the Republicans of today. But they did not become the ascendant party, the ruling party, until when? Until after FDR adopted an agenda. Now look, we don't agree with his agenda, and he wasn't particularly honest with the voters when he was running in 1932. You'll recall that their platform called for a reduction in spending and he campaigned by saying that Hoover was taking us down a socialist path, because Hoover increased spending by 25%, and then, of course, FDR went on to increase spending by 900%. But regardless of whether we agree with their politics or not, they created an agenda, they told people what they were for, and people responded to it. And we didn't have a counter vision for years to come. For 40 years, the Congress was in the hands of the Democrats, Senate as well, a lot of Democrat presidents, and we did not break that lock until when? Until Ronald Reagan adopted a vision for our party. And that's what he began to change the dynamic that was American politics at the time, and we were able to do things like take over the Senate, and eventually, in 1994, take over the House through a process that he started. So when I was asked to come today to talk about how to make Obama a lame duck president, I want to talk to you about this issue of vision. Because Obama, obviously, has no concern about being a lame duck president. He wants to do things his way, and he wants to continue to do them. And his poll numbers have risen, quite frankly, because this is the first time he's really demonstrated any sustained leadership, where he goes out and says something and does what he says. We think it's not legal, some of the stuff that he's doing. We don't agree with the policy. But it's no surprise, since he's starting to act with authority, that some people are responding to it. So what do we do? The answer to the question is, we need to adopt a vision of governance that we want America to believe and understand in if we want to counter this. Politics is, at its heart, a game of momentum and action. There are lots of laws that we could agree on in this room. I'm sure after an hour we would come up with a good list of 10 things that we want starting tomorrow. But it's not enough just to have a list. It's not enough, and this is critical, just to be in Washington, D.C. or Sacramento and vote on a law and say, well, that's the right thing to do, and then not get it passed because we're in the minority here or the president decides to veto it. Take Keystone. The vast majority of Americans believe this is right. Our energy policy is one of the worst policies in American history. We're the first civilization in history to trade at great length and be dependent on peoples who were actively fighting. When the French and the English fought, they stopped trading with each other. And then when the fighting stopped, they traded again, but not during. We've been funding them. We cost ourselves jobs at home. We drive up defense costs because what happens? We have to be involved in more places in the world. So let's take Keystone. 68% of Americans think that should be passed. Yet the Republicans just want to vote in Washington, D.C. No, that's not what you should do. It's a game not only of ideas, but action and a plan. What should their plan be? They should have voted on Keystone. And then they should have left Washington, D.C., because quite frankly, I don't think we need to pass laws every other day. And they should have gone around the country and rallied America to that purpose. Yeah. Thank you. Put a little heat, pardon the pun, a little heating oil on those recalcitrant senators, on the president, to go ahead and pass that. And then they should do that one at a time. The only way you're going to take the momentum from Obama is to seize it with your own. And that's what we need. And you cannot seize momentum in Washington, D.C. You must seize momentum with the American people. And we need to do the same here in California. I know some of you know that I'm considering running for the Senate seat. You know when Californians are going to vote for Republicans? When Republicans give California a reason to vote for Republicans. And that has to do with vision. I'll close with this little vignette and we'll go to the questions. I had an interesting discussion with a couple of reporters last night. And they asked me point blank, do I think Obama loves America? And I must admit it's the first time on the record I was asked about it, and here was my reaction. Or at least I hope I conveyed this. To me, that's not really the issue. The issue is, do I think he has the right vision for America? I don't think he has the right vision for America. But Republicans are going to have trouble until they proclaim the right vision for America with a plan to adopt it and to utilize the energy of the American people to make sure it's passed. Thank you very much.
How many believe that our president loves America? I mean, it's the type of love where you've got your wife or your girlfriend, and you say, "Hey, can you change the way you're doing your hair? Can you change your dress? Can you go brush your teeth again? I don't like the way your jewelry looks. I don't like the way you talk in public. And oh, I love you." You know, just thank you, Tom, for that reminder. I hope you've been gathering some questions. Robert, are we getting a couple questions at least? All right. If you have a question about anything that you've heard today, begin to write it down. I thought of a good one, and both Steve and Tim touched on it. I'm a councilman for the city of Fresno, and when I was driving up to Sacramento yesterday, I got a phone call from our police union, the leader, the chair of our police union in Fresno. And he said, "Steve, I want to talk to you about something, but I don't want to talk to you as a police union guy to the city councilman. I don't want it to be about our titles. I know you're in the Tea Party. I'm a police officer before I'm the union leader, and I'm very worried about these cameras that our officers are going to have to wear. Steve, you know, people are doing this because they want security, and we understand that, and they want our officers to be secure. He said, do you realize that there's going to be a lot of Fourth Amendment, real sketchy Fourth Amendment violations when our officers begin wearing cameras and they walk inside somebody's house and you see everything about them, and that video can be obtained by anybody who wants to obtain that video? I would, you know, one of the things that we're concerned about the Tea Party is the loss in the strength of our adherence to the Constitution, right? That's one of the reasons we're here today, is we love our Constitution. And all three of these gentlemen mentioned living by the laws and the rules of the land. I would like to ask, in light of my story, and you might have a different way of looking at it, are you concerned about Fourth Amendment violations underneath this president and our current federal government? And I would really like each of you to respond if you could. And if you don't want to, you could just say pass to the next question. But Steve Frank, if we could start with you and talk about Fourth Amendment for a minute.
As the non-attorney here, I see this not as a Fourth Amendment issue, but a control issue. And that those who are pushing for the body cameras are more interested in gaining more information on all of us. And I think that's really what's behind it. It has nothing to do with making sure that police aren't corrupt, the police acted properly. I think this is more about getting more information. And at some point in time, we need to say enough is enough.
All right, thank you.
I favor police wearing body cameras. I think that the history demonstrates more than sufficient need for it. I think that the concern rather should be focused on the tremendous number of laws on the books that make it such that you commit 3 felonies a day, whether you know it or not, and the tendency to criminalize and over-criminalize absolutely everything, which is a tremendous risk to our freedoms. Even when we don't realize it, we might think, well, what risk is it to me? I'm a law-abiding person. Well, first of all, you're not a law-abiding person. And secondly, even if you were a law-abiding person, with a government under which practically everything is illegal, it's very easy to portray you as a non-law-abiding person if a prosecutor is so inclined. So I think that's very dangerous. It's true, giving the government so much information over our lives is a danger, but I think that danger is better handled by reducing the scope of government authority over our lives in general, rather than allowing armed deputies of the state free rein to search us, arrest us, detain us, and deprive us of our civil rights on a daily, indeed hourly basis.
So my perspective starts with the historical maxim that personal freedom throughout really all of history varies with security. The more secure your country is, the more freedom can tend to flourish. And if your country and borders are insecure, government tends to centralize around that. Think of it this way. The consolidation of Homeland Security occurred how? In response to threats from outside our border and 9/11. And so one of the things we need to be mindful of is that in order for us to enjoy our freedoms here, we cannot neglect the dangers abroad. If we allow things to get out of hand internationally and there is a big event, that's going to push for even bigger government and more consolidation. Another point to remember is the government big enough to be your healthcare watchdog is the government to do a lot of other things that we don't like. You used to be able to live your life with the news of the village barely interrupting your daily lives. Now with so many people living here, you have government at every single turn. So what the problem is this all becomes one big, and I'm going to use the technical term here, mash of government activity
where the IRS wants to know whether or not you have health care and wants to reach into your bank account, and the Justice Department wants to seize your assets before you're found guilty. All of these things come in the same train. I tell people that government's not a retail operation where you get to pick out one candy bar at a time that you like. It is a wholesale operation where it takes on huge powers at a time. So let's look at the individual issue of whether they should be wearing cameras. But when you look at these issues, remember the bigger picture of what government is doing and how it is growing, which he mentioned, because it's within that context. Every time you incrementally, however rational it seems at that moment for that, you have to be able to do a cost-benefit analysis and understand the other impacts that are going on. Look, today I think it's, you know, I'll be honest with you, I don't even think I would have the right temperament to be a police officer in LA. That is such a hard job. Or in Oakland. I don't know that I could handle that. I also, you know, my brother's an emergency room surgeon. I don't think I'll be good at that either. And so it's a difficult issue one by one, but our bigger problem as a country is because government is everywhere, very much the fourth estate, the bureaucracy. They pass more laws per minute than Congress ever does. You know, it's a do-nothing Congress, but not. I mean, I would like a do-nothing Congress for a week or two, believe me. But it is not a do-nothing regulatory state.
Right.
And so these things occur. So we need to understand, on the one hand, we can't turn a blind eye to the dangers that are out there, because when you have a 9/11, you're going to have bigger government. That's the natural, that's always happened in history. Freedom always gets curtailed in that circumstance. And sometimes, you know, even our greatest leaders, like Lincoln, suspending habeas corpus, he did that kind of thing. Not only were the Japanese interred, but, you know, the Italians were placed in Idaho, of all places. So we need to be mindful and always keep the larger perspective here. Government can't cure every single thing. But when you put government suddenly in the picture in a particular area, it doesn't often recede from that area.
Thank you. All three of you, thank you. Tim, this question's for you. You spoke about law and the president, and this question's a little bit more direct. Why are we allowing the president to himself be held not accountable to the law? And some aspect of, has he reached offenses that you believe are impeachable?
Well, impeachment is a majority vote in the Senate, so that's the only standard, and you wouldn't want to impeach him and Joe Biden be president. You don't want that. But as far as why this is allowed to occur, it's because of the lack of principled leadership. And the lack of principled leadership is the result of two causes. It's the result of just a plain intellectual vacuum, the fact that defenders of liberty, free markets, limited government have failed to hold up their intellectual end of defending their principles in public. And secondly, it's because the Republican Party has become so riddled with lobbyists and private interests who seek to use the power of the state in their favor just as much as the left does. And we see this particularly in the party hierarchy, who are the kind of people who stick around long enough to rise in the party hierarchy. Ordinary citizens who are concerned about their constitutional freedoms, they have regular lives to lead, so you know they don't become career politicians. But people like John McCain, they rise to the high levels of the party because they're able to make the kinds of trade-offs and back-scratching that lead them to that point in the party, and then they're able to force rank-and-file voters to support them because, well, what else are you going to do, vote for a third party? And that's the attitude that keeps them in power and continues to sell out the Republican Party. And that's why the Republican leadership is really worried about things like the Tea Party. That's why I think the best thing that has happened in recent years was the loss of the White House to Obama in his second term. I think that was a great benefit to the Republican Party because the Republican Party is being forced to face its conscience. And if they had won the presidential election, then they would have been able to make the Tea Party heal And instead, the Tea Party, which, as you all probably remember, started out as an anti-Bush movement within the Republican Party because we were frustrated at the bailouts. And I mean, he kept saying he was building political capital, which apparently he never, I guess he must have embezzled it because he never used it, right? And so because of Obama's reelection, that allows the Tea Party to continue going on and trying to force the party to pay attention to principle. That's a very healthy development. And I think in the long run, what we will see is eventually principled leadership arise from the Republican Party that can do something very similar to what happened with Ronald Reagan in the late 70s and early 80s. What happened there was largely an outsider movement from outside the Republican establishment hierarchy that came in and said, no, we are going to stand for principle and not continue to wheel and deal and make nice and play Me Too. And that was a success. I think that's what will eventually happen on the right. The question is whether we'll survive long enough.
So,
Thank
can I comment on?
you, Tim.
So my answer to the question is why Obama is doing this is also very technical. The answer is because he can. Now, why can he is the answer. I talk about this a lot in my book, the upcoming book, The Divided Era, about who we are as human beings. You know, it's human nature to be acquisitive and pugnacious and competitive. In fact, our founders came up after, you know, looking at Montesquieu and others with this system of 3 branches of government because they thought in the natural competition between the 3, there would be what we now call checks and some balance. We also know that the presidency was modeled after George Washington, which is a bit like modeling, you know, the mafia after a saint. You might get a saint once in a while, but the rest of us are never going to live up to the process. So Obama has exploited and is being competitive with his powers. Why? Because the Republicans don't have a sustained vision that they are engaging the American people with, to which, and this is the critical part, to which the Democrats and Obama need to respond. They have the momentum. We have been responding. When we take the momentum like in 1860 or in 1980 or like the Democrats did in 1932, then the Democrats will respond. He's doing it because the Republicans are letting him do it without having their own countervailing plan. It's really not that much more difficult than that.
Thank you. And and being on the board of the California Tea Party Caucus, Tom's disparaging comments about the mafia doesn't apply to anybody in this room. Just want to clear that. Steve Frank, you've often talked about, and you talked about today, about Barack Obama's lack of being the type of leader that we can tell our children to look up to and to aspire. You talked about aspiring, as you have many times, aspire to be our best. And Tom, you also talked about vision, creating a vision in your opening comments. I'd like both of you two to take about a minute or a minute and a half each to talk about how do we create this vision that you talked about, Tom? How do we change the Republican Party and make it impactful with a vision that gives people a clear alternative to the Democratic Party? Steve, if you'll go first, and then Tom.
Stop the politics. When an issue comes up, I can't think of the name of the senator now, but there's a U.S. senator who says the first question when he looks at a bill is it constitutional? And that, Mike Lee of Utah, and that really has to be our question. Yes, I love a good political game. Those who know me well know I love the internal fights in there. I don't shy away from them. But when it comes to policy, we really need to make a determination what's right, what's wrong, what's constitutional. and then move on that. Instead of the idea that, well, you know, if we compromise a little bit here and compromise a little bit there, we'll get a little bit of what we want, and eventually we may get everything we want, but that's a long time down the road. We deserve better than that. We deserve our elected officials to be better than that. They need to have not merely a vision, which Tom talks about, but the gumption to stand up to their oath of office. Either they told the truth and they swore that they would uphold the law, or what they really meant was, how can I get ahead using this political office and any bills that come in front of me? And so we need to, as a Tea Party and as conservatives, instead of looking at somebody, are they electable? You know, you're running for Congress. Can he win? I don't know. But I know that he stands for the right things, and he won't back down. As opposed to somebody on this side of the room who's running for Congress, all they want is the seat. We don't want people who stand for election. We want people who stand for something.
So the way I look at this is to understand that, of course, that politics is, timing's everything. And people have, any one election is a response to the events that are going on, or at least successful elections. So let's bring this to California. How many, raise your hand if you think we have a railroad crisis in California today? We're spending $70 billion plus, or hope to, for high-speed rail. Now raise your hand if you think we have a water crisis. Why are we spending 15 times more on rail than water? You know. Y'all know what my answer is going to be, because they can, because we haven't provided the alternative vision. We're number one in poverty in the nation, in large part because of unemployment, in large part because of our water policies. If we, as a party, capitalized on an issue, a relevant issue. Now look, you could have the best conservative coastline policy ever dreamed up. But if you're running for office in Kansas, they're going to think you're a little out of touch. We have an issue here in California. It makes no sense to the average person that we're doing this, and we need to capitalize on it. We have a water crisis, not a rail crisis. So if you're going to pick up momentum as a party, and you know, I'm just being either the historian or the consultant, however you want to look at it, pick a relevant issue, develop your policy within your principles, and then start talking to people and ask them the question, why are you supporting people who support rail over water? And if you develop a strong enough theme and agenda and platform along those issues, that's where you can get your momentum.
Can I just...
Yeah, Tim.
Just very briefly to add to that, I think, you know, every successful politician does compromise. We've talked about Reagan and Lincoln, and they compromised just as much as any successful politician is going to compromise. But there's a very important difference. You can compromise and still have principle. And the way you do that is by coming out and saying to the public, look, we were forced into this compromise because we didn't have the votes, but we still believe in the principle, and we're going to continue fighting for that principle as we go forward. That's all you have to do. And the people understand that sometimes you have to make a political deal, but they'll respect you for that. The problem, the reason why the Republican leadership has fallen in the esteem of any reasoning being is because they don't do that. They come out and they play it as if it's a win for them when everybody knows it's not. There's no harm in the world with making a deal if you're forced into making a deal. Just come out and articulate the principle. That's what Reagan did. That's what Lincoln did. That's what the great Republican leaders of the past were able to do. They were forced to take half a loaf sometimes, and they would say, look, I'm not going to rest until I get the other half of the loaf. And we'll get that next time. Right?
Thank you, Tim. And Tom, being from the city of Fresno, your comments are so accurate. We're at ground zero for high-speed rail, and Madera's right behind us. That project's beginning in Fresno. Well, they say it's beginning. The truth is, it's in its short life, it's already almost 2 years behind. The things that they're just now doing, we were told we're going to happen 2 years ago. They're in a big eminent domain process mostly. And yet,
According to the state's own numbers, high-speed rail costs the equivalent of the gross domestic product of Utah.
wow.
You could buy Utah, or you could buy the train.
I prefer Utah, and I've never been there. Let's buy Utah, okay? Now there's vision.
How would you get around? Because you wouldn't have a train.
Now there's vision.
I got to tell you, I just buy the Southwest Air ticket. They're in business for themselves. I don't have to subsidize them.
Perfect. Thank you. And so, yes, let's give these guys a hand. Great. And I was going to say, so we have no train crisis in the city of Fresno, but we have a water crisis in the city of Fresno.
Will you think of the magnitude of the dollars being spent on a train? How many of you wake up in the morning worried about whether we're going to have a train? I'm in the Bay
none of
Area.
us.
I watch the weather a lot. I didn't used to be a big weather watcher. I mean, it's just staggering. Your budget's a reflection of your priorities.
And this is a position where we can make common cause with the left. Because all you have to say to your leftist friends, if you have any, is it really better to spend, what, 70, 80, 90 billion dollars on this train? Or what about putting that money into cancer research? Right? What are the social justice implications of taxing poor people in California to fund a train that will primarily serve the wealthy, the tourist class? Poor folks in Oakland ain't riding trains to L.A., right? No matter how fast that train is.
Right.
You're going to take the money from poor people who are working for it and give it to the wealthy developers and contracting unions that are supporting high-speed rail. This is something that the right should be able to reach out to the left and say, if you believe in anything like justice, you have to reject this glorified it's just a monument to Brown's legacy, a legacy project that is funded on the backs of the working people of California. That should outrage the left as much as the right.
Fantastic. All right, Tim, the Texas judge stopped Obama's executive amnesty based on the Administrative Procedures Act. Can the APA stop the net neutrality vote on Thursday and the BATF trying to take away 223 and 556 grain ammo? And so can this Administrative Procedures Act be used more aggressively?
It certainly can be used aggressively. I don't know enough about either the net neutrality rule or the ATF rule.
Nobody does it. They're just making it up.
Yeah, honestly, I spend my time suing state governments most of the time. I just don't have time to follow everything, the deluge of stuff that comes in daily from the administration. So I don't know much about those rules, but I suspect yes. I mean, what the APA requires a lengthy notice and comment procedure so that they can tell you what they're planning on doing and let you comment on it, and then they consider it and all that sort of stuff. And they very often just ignore or some way violate that procedure.
Thank you. Steve Frank. And Tom, I'm going to have you quickly answer this one as well. And gentlemen, by the way, we're down to about 8 minutes, so now I'm in a very brief, direct answers as possible. Steve, do you believe that at the federal level, we talking about Barack Obama, that Republican leadership is truly rhinos, not allowing conservative vision to actually come to the forefront?
I actually don't believe that. I think what they're interested in is keeping power for themselves. When I look at the voting records of our Republican leaders, Boehner, McCarthy, the new guy from Louisiana, solid conservative votes. The problem is they don't translate those votes into leadership of conservatism. They just want to continue themselves in office, and that's the bigger problem.
Fantastic. Tom?
I'm a tad bit more philosophical about this notion. Raise your hand if you think there's been more than 2 great speakers of the House in history that you're fans of. It's not really their role historically to be the leaders of movements or the party. You know, John Adams had an unsuccessful presidency
because he was in Congress the whole time, and he remained the congressional type guy when he ran. Big changes in government don't come from Congress, they come from people from outside of the Congress, and big movements start with presidents who come outside the Congress. So I'm looking for a presidential candidate with a vision. Ronald Reagan took hold of Washington. He didn't manage Washington, he changed the direction of it. Rather than spend my time, which, you know, I wish they would do other things as well, we need to play for 2016 with someone with a vision, and they, believe me, they will follow. They will. They'll start to pass better laws when we have someone who's a better leader, that one singular person who comes in and says, we can lead America again.
Thank you. Tim, and I've got to keep moving quickly, so make our answers short as well. Tim, why is Congress deferring to judges to settle constitutional issues?
And they've made bigger choices than the Congress has.
Well, I think that is the proper role for federal courts to settle constitutional disputes, although the other branches also have an obligation to interpret and apply the Constitution. And very often what happens is Congress says, it's the court's job to decide whether, you know, these constitutional disputes. And of course, then the courts often defer to Congress and say, well, Congress passed it, so we're going to assume that they thought it was constitutional, when in fact they didn't think about it at all. You know, they rang the doorbell at the Supreme Court and left it on the doorstep and ran away, you know. And the Republican Party is just as guilty as the Democratic Party at this, right? With the McCain-Feingold campaign finance law, which was a blatant violation of the First Amendment, President Bush said it violated the First Amendment, and in violation of his oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States, signed it into law anyway, saying, well, the Supreme Court will sort it out. That sort of irresponsible leadership is why we're in the mess that we're in today. What we need is a much more active court system that will enforce the Constitution and not defer to elected officials, let alone hired bureaucrats and administrative agencies, as well as congressional and presidential leaders who take their oath of office seriously.
Okay, actually, I'm down to almost closing comment status, but I'm going to give 30 seconds to Steve Frank and then 30 seconds to Tom. How would you stop the so-called pathway to citizenship?
Enforce the laws that we have today, and and unfortunately, we have to use the courts to do that. Get the courts to say the laws mean what they say.
Tom, 30 seconds.
I think, again, the Republicans need to take the issue and break the current dynamic. We are in what I call the CNN phase, which is the only thing they do is rail on Republicans for failing to send people back, and that just freezes the issue. Remember, the Democrats don't want immigration reform. They're benefiting it from that. Republicans need to be wiser, think out the box, bring people to the table on immigration, because everybody in this country, if they knew it, would be horrified at the crimes being committed on the border, and everybody in this country would want to do something about that if we worked together. But just like if you're in your relationship with your spouse, if all you do is yell at each other, you're not going to make progress.
Thank you. All right, we're down to closing comments. Tom, normally I would have you do, actually, Steve Frank, but I just asked you a question. Tim, we're going to give you 1 minute. Then we're going to go to Tom, a second. We're going to give you a minute, and Steve, your final minute. Just 1 minute each, though, gentlemen. Returning to our theme, how can we help make Barack Obama a lame duck president?
Mostly, what you need to do is tie him down by the chains of the Constitution. And the way that Congress has to do that is sue him, cut funding for government programs. Mm-hmm. Those things, now, they haven't worked too well so far, but they haven't been tried very hard. But I think most of all, you know, invoking Lincoln, Lincoln has that wonderful line in the first inaugural where he says, "We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies." I think we really have to reach out to Democrats, to leftists, and say, are you happy with what this president is doing? Are you getting what you wanted? Are you happy with our guy coming in and exploiting the kind of power that he's using right now? What happens when our guy comes in and says he's not going to enforce laws that you believe in, right? Or even laws that we pass, right? So I think that's what we have to do on our side of the constitutional spectrum, is look at this not as just a politics matter, but as a constitutional matter and the kind of precedents we're setting for our children and our grandchildren.
Thank you, Tim. Tom.
I guess I'd like to wind up by saying, I mean, you've heard me say over and over again, it's a question of plan and momentum and things like this. I would ask you, when you're considering who you want to be president, I think we need someone who understands limited government, but has also been able to enact it, to make changes. Look, it's human nature once you have big government to sit at the trough and try and get stuff out of it. That's just basic human nature. Of course, these big companies are going to go after it. Of course, politicians are going to want to get the money. We have to accept that. So then we have to understand that they're going to be motivated that way, and the founders understood that, and they tried to create this limited government. We need a presidential nominee who has faced the adversity of trying to slim down government and actually did it. Not rhetoric, actually did it. And it's that kind of person who will be able to reform government and know the difference between the government we need and the government the lobbyists would prefer us to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Somebody once said that information without action is wasteful, and that action without information is fanaticism. It's not enough to show up here, listen to this panel, go home and tell your spouse, your friends, gee, I heard this panel. That's not enough. We need your action. We need you to strengthen your Tea Party clubs, your 912 clubs, your conservative groups. We need you to work with local candidates. We need you to work for principled candidates for partisan office. The basis of those principles are very clear, and that's what the Tea Party stands for. Limited government, lower taxes, free markets. Every dollar of taxation is a dollar less of freedom. And if we understand that, and if we support those candidates that do that, and if we build our clubs, not statewide, but in Chico, in Roseville, in Alpine, in Los Angeles, that makes the difference. God bless.
All right, thank you. So, I've got a few minutes to get us out of this building. I was supposed to take about 10 minutes to recap. I don't think that's actually necessary. When I listened to the three combined answers and the statements that were made by the gentleman on the stage, it seems to me that we in this room are still in the position of forcefully appealing and prodding our leadership. Would you agree with that? Okay. So I think that's the role that we're currently stuck in. So we have got to be aggressive in that role. I will remind you again about this postcard. Please fill one out, put a personal note on it, and send it to your congressman. If you don't know who that is, we'll help you find that at the Tea Party booth. I would like to say that on behalf of the Tea Party California Caucus, we're glad that you packed this room with us. We'll be doing this again in a different format. You know, normally we have a panel and then we have a fiery meeting, but these guys have brought some fire to us this morning. We're going to have another meeting at 2 o'clock in the room next door. We want to help me thank our panelists for their comments today. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, have a great convention, and we'll see you at 2 p.m.